Welcome to Rebrand, where this season we're looking at and imagining a better United Methodist Church. I'm Tim Jones.
And I'm Ben Smith.
In today's episode, we're talking about what it means to move from the current survive mentality to a future thrive mentality. To do this, we need to critically analyze where the UMC stands today and then envision some change that can be done in order to meet the needs of our surrounding communities. Well, we're going to break this down in three levels: on a personal level, congregational level, and a denominational level. And also, we have a special guest, the Reverend Kim Goddard, will be here to help us look at past, present, and future. So as always, we're so glad that you're joining us. So let's jump right in. Ben, we're just going for it.
We are.
This is not a catch up.
Nope.
This is we're diving in.
Been there, done that. We're getting serious here. We said it from the beginning of the season that this one is going to be a little bit more. It's going to have some more meat to it. It's going to be not quite as silly. That you know we're digging into stuff, and so we're going right to it today. I also
talk to us about some definitions here.
Yeah.
Survive, thrive.
As we start that, I want to give a special call to those of our listeners who are just listening and not watching.
Yes.
This, I think, probably this whole season, but especially this episode, we're gonna share some graphics and some maybe some working definitions and stuff that it may be helpful to see, to be able to read.
Yeah.
And you can also find some of that reformatted on Instagram, so you can follow us, rebrand_pod. But if you are listening to this, and you could be watching it on our website at rebrandpodcast.com, I highly recommend that. I think you're going to get a little bit more out of watching it, especially this episode. But yeah, I want to dive into what does it look like to have a survive mentality, and then what could it look like to really live into a thrive mentality.
Yeah. Hey, and I want to say too, I'm so glad, as Ben's been doing some research here, he's the one that came up with the idea. Let's break this down on the 3-level process.
Yeah.
And I think that's brilliant for us to look at it from a personal inward self, look at it at our church level, and then the denominational level. And I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. We're doing individual, local, denominational, and then with Kim, and some of our own conversation, we're looking at past, present, future.
Right.
So for a moment, as I was planning, I was like, what if I made a matrix? What if we talked about past individual, present congregational, future? It was too much. It got to be too much. But all right, I want to look first at the individual.
Yep.
So survive to thrive, what does that look like on the individual level? So on the individual level, survive mentality looks like individuals operating under this survive mentality may feel uncertain about the future of their faith or of their church, their context. They may adhere to traditional practices and beliefs, even if these no longer resonate fully with their personal or spiritual growth.
Yeah.
So that's it's going through the motions, right? There may be a sense of spiritual fatigue or disillusionment, with focusing primarily on maintaining personal faith under challenging circumstances rather than exploring new spiritual paths or deepening their relationship with God in innovative ways. So that's just not seeking anything more, but just seeking to maintain what I have already. But then when we move to a thrive mentality, individuals with a thrive mentality actively seek personal spiritual growth and are open to new forms of worship and faith expression. They embrace change as an opportunity for deeper spiritual understanding and connection. So they're seeking the new in their personal faith. There's a strong focus on how their faith can positively impact their daily lives and the lives of those around them, leading to active engagement in community, service, social justice issues, and church activities.
Love that.
Taking an active role.
So, one of the things as you were talking us through that really jumps out at me is the word fatigue.
Yeah.
On the survive mentality, and the thing that really I think just became clear when you said that was fatigue can put us in a place where we're not even recognizing what's going on around us.
Yep.
We have got to just get things done, and we're not aware of just how blah we feel. Just how blah we're thinking. When the energy level is low to nil, it's just hard to move forward. So I think some of this, while we are going to be looking critically at having a survive mentality, I think some of it, we may not even recognize we're in a survive mentality just because either we're so tired or we've been there so long, we're not recognizing that all we're doing is the day-to-day and no future look, no energy going toward that thrive mentality that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's true. When you're so burnt out, sometimes all you can do is put one foot in front of the other, and that's sometimes you have to operate that way.
Sure,
but if that's the only way you're ever operating, then you're never going to make any real progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So then when we move to the local church level, what does this look like for congregations? Local churches with a survive mentality often focus on maintaining existing congregations and traditions, sometimes at the expense of adapting to changing community needs or demographics.
Wow.
We see this all the time. We have churches in communities where the church body looks so different from the neighborhood around them, because it's the grandparents of the people who were there 75 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's all of these new people in their community. Often in my context in North Knoxville, it is growing, but they've been here. There's a huge Hispanic population in the north central Knoxville area, and we have these churches which are exclusively white.
Yep.
And there's sometimes and this is just a reality. So many of our churches don't even know who the neighbors are around their church.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because whether they are your neighbors, whether you're living in that community, or that's just where your church is, so often we don't even know the people who are around the church. Those are the people we should be reaching out to, we should be building connections with, but sometimes we don't even know who those people are. Yeah,
that we have so many churches that, when they were first built, they were built for people to be able to get there by foot or by horse sometimes. But I mean, the main idea was we're in a community where you can walk. We don't do that anymore. No. Not at least not in our area. And so if you're driving in 10, 15, 20 minutes to get to church, sometimes that can be difficult to know your neighbors as well. You just
gotta be intentional
because you're not there. So you have to be intentional.
Yeah. All right. More on local church survive mentality. Financial and resource constraints can dominate decision making, leading to a risk-adverse attitude that prioritize keeping the church doors open over community engagement or mission work.
Wow.
That's convicting.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I can remember more than not, probably, sitting in those business meetings, and we're so concerned about where the next dollar is going to come from that you're not even thinking about mission.
Yeah.
And again, I think over time we start living there, and it becomes the norm, and it's hard to break through on that.
Yep. And then one more: worship services and church activities might remain unchanged for years, reflecting a reluctance to modernize or experiment with new forms of worship and fellowship.
Did you say years or decades?
Millennia?
Millennia? Yeah. Golly.
Look,
We,
I love the hymns, and they don't need to go away.
No.
I'm all about it. But worship can change.
Sure.
You can keep some tradition. It's not getting rid of tradition. It's just incorporating new.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And sometimes looking at our current traditions and how that affects communities. One of the big topics that we've talked about within the church world goes to visitations. Used to, pastors would go knocking on doors and to their congregation and or to their neighbors. That's not necessarily the way that communities respond now.
No.
If you get a door that gets opened, it is a look of suspicion because that's just not a norm. And so what does that mean? Do we continue doing that and kind of ostracizing ourselves, or do we look at a new way of visitation?
Yeah.
Do we look at a new way of whatever X may be?
Yeah. And I think it's taking your traditions, which as a denomination we hold very dearly, and we all know church members who stand on tradition, and, taking those traditions and finding ways to still lean on them, to still involve them, but make them more approachable to people who aren't familiar with them.
Yeah.
Because, excuse me, how else are you going to get people in a part of your community if you have all of these traditions that they don't know, all of this language that you use that they don't know,
and doesn't make sense?
It does not make sense. You're talking about the blood of Jesus, washed, stained red, washed clean. Like what is that? What are you talking about?
Yep.
You drink blood? But that's real, and there's so many of those, and we are in more than we have been in a long time. We're in a post-Christian society, where so much of that language, which was borderline commonplace before, at least people were kind of familiar with it, now could seem so foreign to someone who hasn't been to church.
Yeah.
We have to make space for them.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you get rid of it completely, but you find the place where it needs to be used.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be used in worship. Maybe that is a teaching series, and you combine something in there. But if we're using language that people don't understand, there brings that fear. And part of a fear mentality is also a survive mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what we're talking about today, what we want to talk about today, is moving from survive or fear to thrive and hope.
So then local churches, which embody a thrive mentality, are dynamic and responsive to their community's needs. They're willing to innovate, whether in worship, outreach, or community involvement, to better serve their congregation and neighborhood. These churches prioritize mission work both locally and globally, viewing it as essential to their identity. They actively seek ways to engage different age groups, backgrounds, fostering an inclusive and vibrant community. I mean, we just talked about it, right? We kind of jumped ahead, but that's the local church thrive mentality.
And that means we have to make a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It means we have to sacrifice some of our traditions, some of the things that we're used to doing day in, day out, week in, week out, in order to make room for the other.
Yeah.
Which is the entire mission and ministry of Jesus. Always looking toward the other and saying, how can we include and how can we show love to the people that feel excluded anyway, but are being almost intentionally excluded from the church because we're so set in our ways.
Yeah. All right, now at the denominational level. So a survive mentality. At the denominational level, a survive mentality is marked by efforts to uphold traditional structures and doctrines, even when they may no longer be effective or relevant in the modern context.
Yeah.
That's big.
It is.
It's going to piss some people off.
It will. It will. I mean, but we really hold on to that.
Yeah.
And it's really no different than what the Pharisees did, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Pharisees had their laws, and they were, this is how things have to be done. And anytime you went away from that, it didn't matter if it was good or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was, that's illegal. And here they were talking to the Son of God. What are you doing healing on the Sabbath? What are you doing picking food on the Sabbath? What are you doing blah, 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 blah? And missing the opportunity of the miracle that was taking place or the love that was being shown, all because they were stuck in that tradition. That's exactly what we're talking about there.
Yeah. And I think what I keyed in on there was it made things that may no longer be effective or relevant in our modern context.
Yeah.
So we have to we have to operate in the context which we are in.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about reading scripture in context, that it would be doing a disservice. You would be reading scripture incorrectly if you didn't take into consideration the context in which it was written.
Yep.
Right? We learn about that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do ministry. We have to plan our ministry in context as well. And we are called to be in the world but not of the world, right? And sometimes we get this criticism that you're just pandering to culture.
Yeah.
You're just trying to be the same as culture. You have to be in the world but not of the world. That's true, but you still have to tailor your ministry to be able to engage with society, to be able to engage with your context effectively. And that's going to change over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, then we have the denomination may struggle with internal division. You think?
What?
Focusing energy.
Does that happen?
It said may.
Oh, may.
Yeah.
Okay.
The denomination may struggle with internal division, focusing energy on resolving conflicts instead of moving forward with a cohesive vision.
Wow.
Yep. That's us.
Wow.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Then the next one we have, there can be a lack of clear or unified direction for the future, leading to stagnation and an inability to effectively address contemporary social and spiritual issues. Stagnation. Yep. It's true. So then when we look ahead to what a thriving mentality looks like at the denominational level, it's characterized by a forward-looking vision that embraces change and innovation. The UMC would focus on unity amidst diversity, finding strength in a variety of viewpoints and experiences. The denomination would actively engage with contemporary issues, applying Christian principles to advocate for social justice, peace, and environmental stewardship. So there's that doing ministry in context.
Yes.
And then there would be a concerted effort to nurture leadership and talent within the denomination, investing in education and developing programs to equip individuals and congregations for effective ministry in a rapidly changing world.
Yes.
That's a mission statement right there.
Yeah,
I mean, all of those are a mission statement. I want to read that one again. There would be a concerted effort to nurture leadership and talent within the denomination, investing in education and develop programs to equip individuals and congregations for effective ministry in a rapidly changing world.
Yeah. So, a survive mentality, whether you are individual, whether you are local, whether you are denominational, all has that stuck mentality.
Yeah.
It all has an inward focus.
Mm-hmm.
It is putting tradition before mission and community.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings about fear and fatigue.
Yeah. And I think it's, for me, I keep going back to it's this like idea that we can only be as good as we have been. That we can never be better than what than where we have been.
Yes.
That at best we can get back to the good old days.
Yeah. So, when we pop the graphic up, and it may be up right now.
Boom.
When we pop the graphic up.
Now.
So the graphic,
If you're listening, you don't know what's happening.
not a clue.
You should watch.
The graphic shows us the different things that you just said,
Yeah.
highlights those definitions. And I'm wondering to our listeners and viewers, when you look at this, do you find yourself in that survive mentality?
Whoa.
And
Just do a little personal inventory real quick.
Right. But here's the thing. This is not to beat you up. This is not to sound too critical on you. While we are pointing things out, there's hope. And the hope is you don't have to stay there. The hope is you begin to make some of the changes that are pretty simple from making a mentality change, but difficult when it comes to the sacrificial change. But we're hoping that we take a look at some of these and begin to take baby steps or even large leaps from survive to the hope and the thrive, which means we have to look at our current community that's beyond the people that are sitting in the pews and see what can we do to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first step to making this transition is identifying our current problems.
Yes.
Being truthful and viciously honest about where we are falling short.
Yep.
And identifying the realities of where we're at.
Let's talk about the big one. Everyone recognizes this. We've recognized this for 50 years, if not longer. And that's declining membership.
Yep.
It's very, very rare that we're seeing across the board large numbers going up, growth going up. Part of it is because we're older. And when people pass away, that means membership is declining. But it also means we're not doing a good job of making disciples for the transformation of the world.
Yep.
And meaning that we are not replacing folks that we are losing due to them going home and being with God.
Yep. We have a huge gap. If we look at generations, right, we have a huge hole right in the millennial and Gen Z area. And it's scary because, we've talked for a while now about how the church struggles to reach millennials.
Yes.
And that continues to be true. But now Gen Z is old enough that they are in college.
Yes.
and starting to leave college. I mean, there are some who are in the there are many who are in the workforce, right? Like Gen Z now, I think when we look at Gen Z, they're born from like 97 to 2008, 2010, somewhere like, the intersections are gray, but you're looking at young professionals, college, and like maybe you get into some high school.
Yeah.
And then now we have Gen Alpha, which is the youngest generation right now. And they're like birth to 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
13. So the gap, the hole in our denomination is just growing.
Right.
We still don't have a lot of those millennials, but now we're also losing the Gen Z because they graduate high school. Their parents don't bring them to church anymore, and they're choosing not to engage with.
Yeah, I agree. I would argue that there's still a bit of a gap with Gen X, which is where I fall.
Yeah.
Boomers are still our largest generation within the United Methodist Church. Here's some hope that I have with my generation. Being Gen X, one of the things that we have been known for are we're deconstructionist.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that it's going to take some deconstruction to help us get into a growth mentality and a thrive mentality. What we're not good at is the reconstruction. And unfortunately, if you've got a group that is good at deconstructing something but not reconstructing it, you could have a major problem there. And so we need some help with that. And in order to get that help, we have to open up to our other generations.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, that means we have to make some changes that becomes appealing as well as including, because, man, we suck at including others. We love doing things ourselves and the way that we want to do it.
Yep.
So I think that kind of brings us to another one of our problems, and that's going to be some internal divisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have all kinds of theological and social divisions in our denomination that have really shaked us to our core. Right now, especially, we're looking at LGBTQ plus inclusion.
Yes.
But also like scriptural integrity and interpretation of scripture. We look at current political topics, political disagreements, and how we as a faith community, as a denomination, are called to engage or not engage with those. And there's huge disagreement there. And there has always been, right? We are not, nowhere does it say that we all have to agree.
Right.
Right? But we have to be able to do ministry in spite of our disagreement.
Yeah.
And that is what we've been failing at doing.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that there is a struggle in the United Methodist Church when it comes to LGBTQ, and when it comes still to racial issues. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you really start to drill down. It's more about being right and wrong. And we don't allow for the gray. We are very much, it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way.
Yeah.
Instead of believe what you want to believe and hold on to that. And I'm not talking about from a pluralistic way that anything goes, you can believe whatever you want to believe. What I'm talking about is hold on to your core values, but don't let your core values begin to push others away or begin to exclude others and ostracize others.
Yeah.
Allow some room for some conversation, and let's not put God in a box. Let's let God be God and let God's love shine everywhere.
Yeah.
And then let's follow Jesus's commands to love others as we love ourselves.
Yeah. I think it's hard though, because we get into places where your difference of I'll point over here. Your difference of I'm not pointing at them. I'm pointing in another area. Your difference of opinion from mine. Sometimes it's hard for me to be okay that we're different in this opinion because your opinion means that I don't have a place. You know, that's hard.
Yeah.
So when one opinion says there's no place for LGBTQ people in leadership, that's taking away a place for someone.
Right.
Right. And that's why we are in such a problematic place that we are now, because it's hard to coexist on some things.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that one of the reasons we see that goes back to that survive mentality, goes back to that fear mentality, because in some instances, by making room and allowing a group of people, no matter what it may be, that is different from me, means that now there might not be a place for me. And I think that's where we have to nip this in the bud. As we move to a more inclusive church, and we're looking for ways for everyone to be a part of this church, that means the pendulum can't swing from this group used to be excluded, now they're included, but that means a group over here is excluded. We have to find a way to allow people the space to be a part of our church.
Yeah. inclusion of one at the expense of another is not inclusion.
No.
Yeah.
It just means that we've
And that's hard.
switched sides.
That's hard to come to terms with. So a lot of times that means that's the middle ground where no one's happy, right?
Sure. Yep.
You get people who are politically the most liberal in our denomination and who are the most conservative, and both of them have a problem with that mentality, right?
Yep.
That idea that there is space for both of the extremes is really hard to come to terms with.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's tough.
Reverend Mike Sluter, part of the conference staff, he tells a story
Here in Holston,
and he talks. I think he heard this maybe from his dad, talking about the polar opposites from a political spectrum aren't really this far apart, but instead he views it as a circle, and the ends of the circle that don't touch right here, that's your political spectrum, and they're actually closer to one another than anywhere else on the circle. It's just they have one little thing that's they're disagreeing about. Let's talk about two more real quick here. One is the financial struggles, and that is we see that all the time in the local church. We touched on it a little bit when you were going through that survive mentality. It relates directly to the decline in membership, but it also relates to that internal division, because as long as we keep fighting internally and pushing people away, there's not room for growth. And so these problems seem to stack on one another. And if you have a problem financially in the local church, you're going to have a problem financially in the denomination. And not that money is everything, but when giving is there, that just allows for more ministry to take place, more resources to be given. The other thing that we've already talked about quite a bit is our resistance to change. And if that one thing right there could begin to shift, all these other problems are taking place.
Yeah.
Or begin to be alleviated. If we could just get to the point where we say, you know what, I believe this, but I am open to something else if that means other people can experience the love of God that I have experienced.
Yeah.
If we could just get to that mindset, that would help us through this resistance to change, which would then allow for more inclusion, which would then allow for growth, which would also allow for moving away from those financial struggles.
Absolutely. That's a good place to leave it. When we come back, I'm really excited about this. For the rest of this season, we have Kim Goddard in with us, and we recorded some really good conversation with her the other day, looking back at some historical context for the Methodist Church, for the Wesleyan tradition, long before the United Methodist Church was around, even before the idea of Methodism was around, but the Wesleyan tradition. So we talk with Kim all about historical context, and then as she sees the church operating now, both as a district superintendent, as a dean of the cabinet here in Holston, also as the delegation leader for the Holston Conference to General Conference. So she has a wealth of knowledge and personal experience, and a really grounded faith to be able to speak into this. So when we come back, we're going to have some questions and conversation with Kim Goddard.
All right.
All right, we're here with the Reverend Kim Goddard in the studio, and we're talking first, our first of this series, we're talking about moving from survive to thrive, or put a different way, from fear to hope. So I hope that in the coming minutes, we're going to talk about a rich history of what it looked like to step out in faith, to make big, bold steps towards a ministry that was thriving and on mission. And at some point, we moved into a place where we were just existing, where we were just desperate to survive, to endure, to continue doing what we were doing. Put a different way, we moved from a place where we were hopeful and optimistic and forward-looking to a place where we were fearful and scared of what would happen if we failed. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like and what a future looks like where we get back to or create a new environment of hope where we are thriving as a church. So, Kim, I want to talk first about in the early church.
We got to say welcome, Kim Goddard.
Hey, great to be here.
It's been too long for us to have waited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, that's true.
So we are excited to have you here.
Well, hey, but you let me wait until you've got all these people listening. This is an international podcast.
International,
Hey,
millions.
Hey, so now is the time.
That's right. That's right. You are about to take us to the next level.
Okay.
We may hit billions after this.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
You know?
I think so.
That's the hope that we're talking. We're not fearful that we're going to get canceled.
Okay.
We're hopeful for billions and billions of listeners.
That's right. We are rebranding a denomination after all. So. Jeez. All right. Well, let's look back. Let's start at the beginnings of the Methodist Church, the beginnings of the Wesleyan tradition. In the beginning, there was John and Charles.
Yeah.
Oh boy. What did it look like? What did hope? What did a sense of thriving look like to the beginnings of our Wesleyan tradition?
Okay. So thriving in the beginning was not about starting a church.
Okay.
Which, don't you love it? It was a group of college students who probably were fearful that they weren't really living into their faith, and so they said, we need help with this, and decided to get together to start to ask those questions. What does it mean? What does it look like to be a Christian? How will we live? Who is a Christian, and how can we be one? And they weren't sure they had all the answers, but they had Charles Wesley in their group, who called upon his older brother John, and they started what they called themselves the Holy Club. A little presumptuous maybe, but they were trying to figure out how to be holy.
Yeah.
And so they began to come together. They read Scripture, they prayed, they talked, they held one another accountable and encouraged one another along the way, deepened their love for God, and then I think asked the next question, so what does it look like then to live this life in our actions? And they began to move out into the community around Oxford University. They spent time in prisons. They took Bibles to the prisoners, but also discovered how incredibly important it was to take blankets and bread. And so from the very early days, we have been a movement and then a church that we believe heavily in the personal gospel, but also the social gospel of loving God and loving neighbor. And I love that John Wesley, for all of his life, was never a Methodist. He was always an Anglican who didn't feel like we needed to start another church. He just wanted to be the best person he could be in his context, and for him that was in the Anglican Church. So how do we best represent Christ in the way we love God and in the way we love our neighbors? And it started with college students.
So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but I would love to get your thoughts on what do you think over the 100, 150, 200 years from this movement to where we are today? Where do you think, or what do you think took place that started to move us away from that desire to love God and love our neighbor to more of that inward focus? How do you think? Where do you think that shift started happening, And then we'll follow up on that. What do we do now? How do we move away from that part of our culture, that part of our process desire into more of an outward focus? So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I would love to get your perspective on what happened in the past. Where did we change? Where did we go wrong? Where did what's taken place that has caused us to move from this movement where we were on fire to make sure that we were loving God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving our neighbor and doing things for that, doing things for our neighbor, into more of a self-reflected, self-centered, inward look. And then I'll follow up with that with what do we do to get out of that, and how do we move back to where we're supposed to be?
You know, of course, that's the $50 million question, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make you rich.
Well, okay. Well, we'll see how that goes. I think a lot of it was there was such growth in the beginning that was the expectation, and I wonder if we got to a place where we just assumed that was going to happen, and so we can take shortcuts. So I think about that early Holy Club. They were, and then the class meetings that were so much a part of that. You know, for Wesley and the revival that swept England, it was very different in what we think of as revival today. You know, today we think of revival as a powerful preacher who preaches a sermon, gives an altar call, people respond and make a profession of faith, and then they're just kind of left to their own devices.
Yeah.
That wasn't what happened with the early Methodists. In fact, Wesley did not give altar calls.
Really?
He preached, he proclaimed, and then gave people an opportunity to learn more. And if they wanted to grow deeper, then they were placed in a class meeting. And that class meeting was led generally by a layperson. So the conversions, and there were many of them, but the conversions took place not in the revival services, but in the preaching services, but in the class meetings. And so the class meeting was so integral. It was an opportunity for people to come together, to encourage one another, to hold one another accountable. And if you were going to be a Methodist, then you attended a class meeting. And if you were going to go to the larger gatherings after that, you had to go with, you had to have your ticket from your class meeting in order to be a part of that. And I think we probably just decided that we didn't have to. That wasn't that important. We can kind of slide on that, and we did. And then I think as we grew, we needed to be structured. We needed to be organized. And just in that organization, I think you can often lose the sense of movement and momentum. I'm not saying we don't need to be structured. I think we do. But we can't get away from our DNA.
Yeah.
And so you're asking, how do we move forward? One of my favorite quotes of Gil Rendell, who is a church consultant who's worked a lot with the United Methodist Church. I've heard him on several different occasions say something like, our most fruitful future, our best path forward is going to come from our most faithful past. And so he's not saying live in the past, but I think he is saying, and I've seen that to be true, look back at your DNA. Our DNA as Wesleyans is strong. Our DNA says we can't do this on our own. We need to be in the company of others.
Yes.
We need that small group to support and encourage us. And then when we know we are being lovingly held accountable, that helps us to stay on the right track. And it helps us to have that fervor and that spirit and that sense of closeness to Christ that allows us to move out. That's what it's going to be for us.
Yeah.
And it's not about how do I live that introspective. It's not just how do I live my personal faith, but then the second part of that always for us Wesleyans, not just how do I love God, but how do I love neighbor.
Yes.
Holiness of heart and holiness of life, and that's where it's going to have to.
Yeah.
That's where it's going to have to happen if it happens.
I hear you using all this language about discipleship, about Christian community, communion. A Christianese word would be maybe the process, the ongoing process of sanctification, rather than just one-time salvation, right? And
Ben dipping into the theology. I love this.
I know,
I'm
talking
excited.
to divinity school graduates over here. But I think our Western Christianity has a huge focus on, in and out, get them saved and send them on their way.
Right.
And that has never been, maybe that does influence our modern day Methodism, but it certainly wasn't a part of the early the beginnings of Methodism.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. It was. It is truly the prevenient, justifying, and sanctifying grace. To throw in some more of those theological terms, that God has always been at work and continues to work. I have said that if you want to watch a Baptist eyes just roll back in their head, we often hear, "Well, when were you saved?" And for me to answer that question, today. And yesterday, and the day before, and I expect tomorrow. Ours is. I love that Wesley talked about the way of salvation as a journey, not the way to salvation.
Yeah.
So that for me, that's the meat and potatoes of who we are as Wesleyans.
One of the things that I know that you're passionate about, and I'm passionate about it as well. And this is where I think we move deep into a thriving church, and that's discipleship.
Yeah.
We talk about that conversion experience, and I think people have different conversions experiences. We look at the disciples, and we never see where the disciples really have a conversion experience. However, we look at the Apostle Paul, and we do see an immediate conversion experience. But I think our emphasis in the Western church has been so much on that conversion experience that we forget about that accountability. Right. And accountability has become a bad word. Yeah. And it's one of those things that when you say it, it tends to turn people off. Because church today, some of my experience, church today is we get up Sunday morning, we go in, we sing some songs, we pray, maybe we give money, maybe we should hear a good sermon, and then we go home. Discipleship in today's world, in that particular model, means I've got one more step where maybe I'm reading the Bible, a daily devotional, or a day where I read a passage. But that's not the discipleship that Jesus calls us to. Those are all good steps. Those are our ways to get. But if we stop there, which I think a lot of people have a mindset that, I'm doing this, I'm okay, we're missing that kingdom life that you talked about earlier in the Lord's Prayer. How can we move into what Wesley called the class meeting, what we tend to call covenant groups nowadays, and what Bishop Wallace Paget has helped us to become familiar with new language in passionate spiritual discipleship. Tell us more about that and what we can do to move into that process.
Well, Nike has a good slogan. Just do it.
Just do it.
I think and that's maybe one of the ways we have shifted from the movement to more to the institution. We do a lot of talking and not a lot of acting sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think it is a matter of just doing it. If I am not growing in my own discipleship, I can't tell you how to do it. And that's one of the things I loved about what Bishop Wallace Paget did for the extended cabinet and the visioning group, the SLI team. She just said, you're going to be in a discipleship group. And then it was up to us to make it what we wanted to make it, and we decided on the covenant discipleship model. And because of what a difference that made for me, and I think for all of us in that group, then I went to my district operational team, and I said, "This is how we're going to do it. We're going to work on our covenant together, and we're going to meet for an hour once a week, and we're going to talk about our faith, and we're going to ask each other, so what are you doing in justice kinds of ministries and in Bible reading or in prayer time, spending time with family, whatever that covenant is." And it meant so much to them that they said to me, "You have to require this of the pastors in the district." And I said, "I'm not sure I can do that." And they said, "But you have to." And so we laid that out as kind of a trial for us. And I said, we're going to do this for a year. And, we've got about 60% of the clergy who are participating in these groups. And I would say of those that, certainly not all, but many of them would say, this has just been transformative for me. And I think that's how that, you just do it. And you see the results, and then it fans the flames for others, because then I can talk about how meaningful it is.
Yeah.
All right, I want to take a turn and talk a little bit more about our current context. So looking at our denomination as a structure, as an organization, certainly as we are walking ever closer to General Conference in a couple months. Survive to thrive. So if we're looking at this focus on merely surviving or being so desperate just to exist, just to continue on, rather than seeking to thrive in our ministry, how do you see that, the negative effects of that desperation just to exist, to hold on to what we've been? How do you see that plaguing our denomination from a structural level?
Well, the one thing I would say about moving from fear to hope, or from surviving to thriving, is that if we are expecting General Conference to right our wrongs and get us to where we want to go, we've put our hope in the wrong place.
Amen.
I had an opportunity to hear Bishop Bickerton, who is the president of the Council of Bishops, and he spoke to the Southeast Jurisdiction cabinets last week. And one of the things he said, and we know it's true, that we cannot legislate ourselves to a place of thriving. That we're not going to get through our current struggles with legislation. And I think we know that. And even the Book of Discipline tells us that. I mean, the Book of Discipline says that the local church is the place for mission and for ministry. That's the place that it takes place. So I believe it starts with the individual asking, how can I more nearly represent Christ in His kingdom here on earth and in my context right now? And to ask that of the local church, how does this local church in this community make a difference? And we do it one by one by one. And it's not going to be with the Book of Discipline, but it will be with our seeking to love God ourselves, and then to show that love, meet the needs just in the community where we are, in that place. And that's what will bring us back, I think, to a place of revival and renewal and hope. And I'm seeing that. I am seeing that in our district. We spent so much time, and we're not through with it, but we've spent so much time talking about disaffiliations and talking about legislation and language. And that's been our focus. We have not been seeing the people in our communities. I think we've spent a lot more time on the internet looking up articles about General Conference and who said what about the United Methodist Church. My guess is that many of us have spent more time doing that than we've actually spent in Scripture asking, so what would Jesus have us do? And that's where that shift will ultimately take place, not at General Conference. And I'm a General Conference delegate. I'll be there doing what I can, but I don't expect that gathering to make us fruitful. So,
yeah, I think that we have gotten to a place where the structure, the precedent, not even tradition, but the precedent of the way we've always done things, the way we're supposed to do things, so often gets in the way of doing ministry. And sometimes you got to break some of that structure a little bit. We were the three of us were in a nominations meeting earlier this week. And sometimes the process, there are a few contexts where I am more aggravated by the process and the structure that we work with than the nominations process. And it's there for a reason, and there are some benefits to the way that we do things and some safeguards against different things. But man, sometimes we sat there and there was a person who we thought was doing so well in their place in doing the work that I think as a room we agreed they were called to be doing. And then we said, but they're term limited. They can't be in that position anymore. And I think the whole room just went, because that was thriving that is thriving ministry being done. But the structure, the precedent says you gotta move on.
Yeah.
What do we do about that? I mean, that structure exists for a reason. There's benefits to that, but sometimes it gets in the way. So how do we address that?
Well, I don't think I have the answer to that question. Can I just say, I don't know?
I don't know. I mean, it's worth as a denomination, we got to struggle with it.
Well, and we struggled with that in nominations.
Yeah.
Do we suspend the rules this time?
Right.
Well, if we do that, then what does that mean for the next time? And does that put us in a... So I wish I had an answer.
Yeah.
And I'll chime in a little bit there because we did spend that time and we struggled, and we don't have the full answer, and we're still struggling with it. But one of the things, and I often credit Bishop Wallace Paget for things, and I'm going to do it again now. In her leadership, she did not let us get caught up in that one question that could have been the rest of our focus for the day. Because we could talk about the pros and the cons all day long. We still have to deal with it. She understood that, but she reminded us there's a bigger mission that we've got to focus on, and she moved us through. And I am so appreciative and grateful for that type of leadership to say, yes, this is important. We're going to deal with it, but we're not going to let it dominate everything that we do. Well, Kim, we want to thank you so much for being a part of this and talking about surviving to thriving. And we've got more pieces that we're going to be talking about throughout this season with you. But we've talked a lot about history. We've talked about our present. We've talked about some future things. If you were going to sum up what we've done today and say, if you don't take anything else away from this episode, this is the most important thing, what would you say that is?
We are not called to live in the past. but our roots are strong. Our DNA is solid. We are called to holiness of heart and life, and I truly believe that our best path forward is going to come from our most faithful past, and that is, just that group of people who got together and said, "What does it mean to love and look like Jesus, and translate that to the world?"
Well, friends, you've heard it here from Kim. If you want to be a part of this movement to reignite the United Methodist Church, at least within the Holston Conference, we just invite you. Get in a covenant group, get in a discipleship group, take that next step to the next level, and let's get back into that movement sense that Wesley had in mind from the very beginning and start living and following Christ like we should. Man, that was incredible conversation. I really enjoy talking to Kim. She has such a wealth of knowledge and the history. I could just sit and listen to her for hours as she starts going into that Wesleyan history. It's so good.
I'm excited for her to be a part of this season with us. And I do think she lends a major degree of credibility to our podcast that we haven't had in the past. So
that is true.
Glad to have her on.
All right, so let's move into a wrap up. Yep. And the first half of this podcast, we gave the definitions on survive and thrive, but we spent a lot of time talking about the survive mentality and really the negative results. Yep. We want to move into a time of hope because, like we said before we went to the interview, you don't have to stay here. You may identify here. If you're honest, you probably identify here.
Sure.
So let's move. And so now let's talk about the thrive mentality and some transitioning of our mindsets in order to get to the thrive mentality, and even give some resources or possibly some next steps in how to move there.
Yeah. So I think the whole idea of having a thrive mentality, of doing ministry in a context like that, is that we are embracing God-sized dreams.
Yes.
We are taking leaps of faith. We are stepping out in faith. This, on a personal level, this is something that is really challenging for me to do. I'm an Enneagram 3. It's the performer, the achiever, that I can do, I must do. I have to be good enough. I have to be impressive enough. It is the hardest thing for me to do in my faith is to give up control.
Yeah, I'm there too. I'm a 3 as well.
Yeah, to say that it's the success of this mission that I'm doing, whatever it is, small or large, is not up to me. It's not up to my power, but up to God's power.
Yeah.
And that's challenging for everyone.
That's
what faith is.
Yeah,
right?
that's the thing. We tend to talk about faith, but we don't necessarily tend to exercise our faith. Yeah. And I wonder, when was the last time you, me, our listeners, our viewers, sat down and not just put one of our goals out that we know we can get, but like you said, the God-sized dream, the God-sized goal. Yeah. And how much prayer do we spend, time in prayer do we spend asking God, what is that dream that you have for us? Yeah. Because if God gives us a dream, God's going to help us achieve it, right?
Mm-hmm. So another one, I think, we've segued straight into it. Forward-looking approaches, right? Innovative strategies for worship, for community engagement, for social justice, for all the things that we're called to do. Look forward, find new ways to engage in those ministries.
Yeah.
We have to.
And a way to do that is to talk to someone that doesn't necessarily live in your church.
Yeah.
Someone that hasn't been so baked in the tradition that you have right now. And that does two things. One, it gives you some new ideas because they're not thinking about this is what we've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But two, it opens the door for ownership for someone that's not a part of your church, which could lead to them becoming a part of the church.
Sure.
And it opens up that door for some inclusivity.
Yeah.
We also have to get back and move forward in a mission-focused outreach.
Yeah.
And that is recentering the core of the UMC. That's exactly what Kim talked about.
Yeah.
Going out and reaching people that saw the church as it was in that particular state and was like, that's not for me. That's too in the box. That's too far away from what I believe God wants us to do. And if we could just get back to that style of mission and ministry, things would explode in the United Methodist Church.
And I like the language there of recentering on the core, what really matters, right?
Yeah.
Finding what it is that unites us and just living into that so hard. I think about when I was just starting in ministry, and I was really frustrated with actually a lot of the same things here of this like lack of ability to change as a denomination.
Yep.
A pastor who has really been a role model for me, a mentor for me, said the United Methodist Church is a cruise liner. It's not a speedboat. That when it is on, when it's in the right direction, when it's full throttle, nothing's gonna stop it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so much momentum. You talk about physics, momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So much momentum that amazing things can happen.
Yeah,
we can cut malaria deaths in half.
Right.
In a campaign, we can save lives. We can change the world. We have done those things, but cruise liners, famously, can't change direction very quickly.
Not quickly at all.
But contrary to that, a speedboat runs into an iceberg. It's stopping pretty quick. But speedboat could just avoid the iceberg.
That's exactly
this metaphor
right.
might be falling apart. I don't know. But a speedboat doesn't have nearly the same momentum.
Right.
But it can change directions.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to be a part of an organization that is that cruise liner because it is slow to change.
Yeah.
But the way that we lessen that impact is by narrowing in on what it is that defines us.
Yes.
Figuring out what is at the core of our identity as the UMC, as followers of Christ.
And just following your metaphor too, I don't want to be off of the cruise liner for the speedboat because of, yes, we could make a quick change on the speedboat, but our impact is so much smaller. I want to be a part of that high impact, great movement. But in order to do that, shifts have to start now before we get any further down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, then our last big point here, a better future living into this Thrive mentality looks like more inclusivity and diversity.
Yes.
Embracing diversity in all forms can invigorate the church and expand its reach.
Absolutely. And, you know, when we talk about the Great Commission and going into the world and baptizing and making disciples, we tend to always think outside of our community. And that's the wrong mentality. We really have to start right here at home. In Acts, it talks about Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the outer parts of the world. And we tend to think our mission and ministry lie further than the community. And it goes back to, if we want to continue to just survive for what little time we may have left, then you're not going to be inclusive and you're not going to be diverse. But if you want to get away from that and move to growth, thriving, and making disciples like Jesus has called us to do, we have to be more inclusive, be open to diversity and open to new ideas to reach our world as it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we go, I want to touch on some practical steps for making this transformation or beginning some of this transformation. So first, revitalizing worship and community engagement. So for me, my mind goes straight to Fresh Expressions.
Yes.
Fresh Expressions is all about looking forward, looking at context, addressing, doing ministry in your context.
Yes.
And finding new ways to bring in new people.
And one of the things, Reverend Dr. Susan Arnold, who is the Congregational Development and Church Revitalization Director in the Holston Conference. Boy, that's long. She also likes to call them holy experiments. And I love that. I love the idea of, one, being an experiment means it's okay if it doesn't go the way that you planned. If it fails, that's all right, because you're doing an experiment, and that means if it fails, you do something else. If it works, then you've got something to hold on to. And she is a perfect person to reach out to if you're in the Holston Conference. If you're outside of the Holston Conference, feel free to reach out to Rebrand, or you could probably still reach out to Reverend Dr. Susan, because she has contacts for others that can help you be a part of that.
Yeah. And just one more note on Fresh Expressions, the two of us, along with the Reverend Dr. Susan Arnold, and really all of the leading voices in the Fresh Expressions movement, will be gathered in Charlotte a week from the sharing of this episode, to learn all about all kinds of different Fresh Expressions. And we're going to put up some content while we're there. Who knows what we'll get into, who we'll talk to, what we'll share, but what we'll learn, individually. But I'm really excited for
I am too. If you're listening to the podcast, especially if you're listening and not in Holston and you happen to be attending, come find us. We'll be there, and we're going to have our cameras and things to like Ben said, do some interviews, get some content up. Come find us.
Yeah. All right, we've talked all about it throughout the episode. Another practical step is investing in, and I'm going to add, investing in and creating space for youth and young adults.
Absolutely.
And that has to be sacrificial.
Yep.
It's not shoving them down in the basement.
Right.
It's not letting, it's like changing some of your traditions, your practices, your budget, your, making space to do ministry in context with youth and young adults.
Absolutely. Sometimes when I am out and about, I will hear things where people compliment what's going on in Holston Communications. And normally when they compliment what's going on, it's because of new content that we've started to do, or changes that they've seen within the video process or the podcast and things like that. And what they've got to understand is the reason that happened is because of you. We brought in a younger person intentionally to have new innovative ideas and a different way of looking at things than what we've been used to in our traditions within the Holston Conference.
Yeah. Well, and it's not it's not that I'm so great.
You're not,
though I
am.
I do believe that I am, but it's just a difference of perspectives, right? And you get a more complete, I think, ability to communicate with people, because now suddenly we can communicate with a wider range of context.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge that we have been effective. Our partnership, or even our larger department, you add Annette in there. Also, Annette Spence, who's the editor of The Call, our news service here in Holston. I have been effective, or I think I've been effective, because I've been given space and authority to really be a part of the work. So often, engaging young people looks like asking their opinion and then making decisions, or saying, all right, this little project right here, let's bring in a young person to do this.
Yeah.
That's not what age inclusion looks like.
Yeah.
This is a little spoiler for the future, but for another episode, that's what tokenism looks like when we look at age.
Yep.
But I think what I have really been thankful for in our department and in working with you is that I really have the latitude, I have the space and the responsibility to speak into what our department is doing, to speak into the ministry that we are a part of. I think that has been a blessing, and it can be a little bit of a model for what it looks like to really make space cross-generationally.
Yeah. And this flows very well into one of the things the Holston Conference is doing as part of their annual conference mission offering this year is New Voices. And New Voices is a way of supporting our youth and young adults, whether we're talking about camping or we're talking about our colleges or our Wesley foundations. The money that is raised in this particular campaign goes to help them not only in doing fun things, activities, being drawn into the United Methodist Church, but educating them with some of the theology, the doctrine, the traditions, but as well as preparing them for leadership to help us move into the future and continue to move into a thriving denomination, local church, and individuals.
Yeah, and giving them tools to be leaders now.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
We're not developing them for leadership down the road. We need them to be speaking into the direction of our conference, of our denomination right now.
Right now. Yep.
And this is this campaign is a big part of.
Yeah.
Of making that happen.
Last thing for practical steps for transformation is going to be adopting technology and modern communication. And that's something that we talk about all the time. It's something that we'll continue to talk about, but being open to what's taking place in the world around us. We're called to be in the world, not of the world, but that doesn't mean that we can't use the tools to reach people that we're not reaching at the moment.
Yeah. And but doing that in a way that is productive. It is advancing of our mission. We're not using technology for the sake of technology or to look cool or to be flashy, but as ministry tools.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Well, this has been a riveting conversation, and I hope a model for the rest of our season. I'm excited to dig into some of this. I'll shout out one more time, those of you who are listening only, I think you missed a little bit this episode. You really should check us out on video. Tim's looking pretty good over there in his hat. And you'll get to see some graphics and some notes and stuff that you would not otherwise get. You can also check out some of that additional content in written form on our website. That's all we have for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one. Until then,
let's move from just surviving and let's move to thrive. Let's be the denomination and the church and the people that we're called to be. We'll see you next time where we're going to talk about some urgency in doing this instead of waiting around for someone to tell us what to do.
Bye.
Bye.